So in the second part of this video, we're going to look a little bit closer at some of these pathogens. So let me jump back here. So we ended the last video. Okay, so we ended the last video right here. And I said, we want to jot some of these down. And these are not anything you need to memorize, but this is a great thing to just kind of have handy in case we want to talk about a specific disease. So, malaria is a pretty common disease that we'll talk about in biology. And so having this handy in your notes will give you a little bit of a hand, right? So there are a lot of different ways that a pathogen can get into your body. So they can be transferred by what we call direct or indirect contact. So indirect contact does not require touching an individual. This could be touching an infected surface. It could also be breathing in air that has respiratory droplets in it that have the pathogen present. So this is actually relevant to us today, right? Because COVID-19 is a virus that is passed through respiratory droplets. And so one of the reasons that, the CDC recommends that we wear masks is because it prevents it lessens the distance that our respiratory droplets go when we breathe out. I read a study that said that 5 minutes of talking puts out the same number of respiratory droplets as one cough. So it's important that in the event that there is something that is airborne, right, that we try to avoid breathing in that infected air. Vectors are other organisms that carry pathogens and can give it to your healthy cells. So this is going to require some direct contact. Now, a great example of this is the tick. So right here next to my picture, this guy right here, right, let's see, okay, that is a tick, and it's a deer tick. You can see that down here, this is the skin of what I'm going to assume is this deer right here. And so we're going to say this deer tick is embedded. So you can see that it's kind of buried its head down into the skin of the deer, and it's feeding on the blood of the deer. That's what a tick does. Now, bacteria in the mouth parts of the tick can be transferred to the deer when it bites the deer. If the deer had some kind of bacterial infection, then it's possible that that bacteria could be transferred to the tick. If the tick falls off the deer and then, ends up biting a human being, it could transfer that bacteria to the human being. So if you have, a bacteria or a virus or something, right, here's our drawing of the bacteria again, right? It's got those little cilia, it's got a nucleus. If it goes through another animal, so we'll say the vector, then it can go to, say, a human. So a vector is if you have a carrier. All right, so a tick is a carrier. Now, there are a lot of body systems that we have in place that can protect us from pathogens. All right. For example, we can look at the immune system. All right. A lot of our tissues, other than the immune system, help the immune system. They reinforce it. So like your skin keeps things from just falling directly into your bloodstream, right? The mucous membranes in your mouth and your nose, they trap pathogens and dust particles and things as they enter your body. The circulatory system, so your blood vessels, they transport the immune cells around your body. So they're kind of like the highway. And when you look at, the cells of the body, you find that they have to interact with each other quite a bit. These guys right here, these are white blood cells. These are these yellow wavy things that look kind of like pasta. These are, we call them microvilli. This is likely an intestinal cell or an intestinal region. Now, cells and proteins are going to be like cells are the cops. Proteins are the weapons that they use to fight the bad guys, okay? So white blood cells are going to attack infections inside the body. They're going to use proteins as their weapons to do that. So a phagocyte, remember phago means to eat. So it's a cell eater. It's going to engulf and destroy pathogens. That means it's going to wrap itself around them and bring them inside the cell and digest it. A T cell is going to destroy an infected cell. And a B cell is going to produce an antibody. Now, a T cell is often called a killer T cell. And a B cell is often called a memory B cell. And we'll see why shortly. Now, there are a lot of different names for the cells that we find in the immune system and in the bloodstream. These are just some of them. You can kind of look through them. Oh, go back. The a phagocyte is an example of the macrophage. All right. That's probably the only one I really want you guys to know by name. That the macrophage is a example of a phagocyte. All right, right there. So, a couple of the proteins we might see that fight off pathogens. All right. There are complement proteins, there are antibodies, and there's interferons. So a complement protein is something that kind of weakens the bacteria's or the pathogen, whatever it is, its cell membranes. It kind of, softens it up. The antibodies bind to the pathogen and prevent them from being able to enter our cells, and therefore render them ineffective. Interferons are going to be very similar to antibodies, but an interferon prevents a virus from entering a healthy cell. So a pathogen here, see these little fellows, right? These are called spike proteins. You may have seen that in the news. That's what exists on the outside of the COVID virus. But these antigens, right, which are likely glycoproteins, so they're sugar and protein kind of together to form a molecule, but you might hear them referred to as spike proteins. They're like little keys, and when they land against the cell membrane, they unlock the cell membrane, and it lets the virus or it lets the pathogen in. The antibody comes in and it binds those, right? So they are bound, and when they're bound, that means they don't work, right? And so when you start to bind all these pathogens together, it makes it a whole lot easier for a macrophage to, eat them all at once, get rid of them. So immunity, if you have immunity to something, what we're saying is you're not going to get sick from the pathogen. And in most immunity, or in all immunity, the pathogens are actually going to be destroyed before you ever get sick. So I am immune to chickenpox. I've had chickenpox before. If I was exposed to the chickenpox virus, then my immune system would knock that out before I ever got sick. That's what immunity looks like. Passive immunity occurs without an immune response. So when you nurse a baby, or if you have, certain genetic markers, you may actually be immune to things without even getting a shot, getting a vaccine, being exposed to those pathogens. If you have active immunity, well, that occurs after you have an immune response. And when you see immune response, think like the immune system had to do something in order to handle that pathogen. There are a lot of non-specific, immune responses. So, for example, this is something that you do every time you get sick. So, like if you get inflammation or blood vessels leaking out, right? If you get leaky blood vessels, that tells white blood cells, hey, come help us. We have damaged tissue here. If you get swelling or redness and pain, that usually tells you, hey, that's some inflammation over here. The white blood cell, this is actually a really cool picture. So the capillary wall, we're going to start with this. So think about a vein, right? A vein is actually musculature. So if you took a cross section of it, right? So the vein is like this, right? And there's our tube. So the blood is kind of moving through here. All this outside, all that's like musculature, and you can kind of see it there. A white blood cell can, when you have these leaky blood vessels, a white blood vessel or a white blood cell sees that and tries to fit through there so that it can go attack the bacteria or the pathogen or whatever it is that's over here causing the issue. All right, so that's a pretty cool, just non-specific immune response. Other kind of non-specific immune response would be a fever. So if you get a fever, your body temperature increases. Now, there's two kinds of fever that we talk about. There's the low fever and the high fever. A low fever, is going to stimulate your white blood cells to mature. So it tells your body, hey, look, something's not right. we need to get some white blood cells going. So white blood cells in your body start to mature so they can go do their jobs. If you have a high fever, that can be really dangerous. That can be bad. That can lead to seizures, brain damage, sometimes even death. So we want to avoid the high fever if at all possible. The other thing that a fever does is it denatures the enzymes in the pathogens. So it's kind of like a bet. Your body's saying like, all right, there's more cells in our body than there are of these pathogens. So we're going to cook them out. And yeah, a couple of our guys might get hurt, but it's worth it because we can cook out or denature all the enzymes in the pathogens, and that will render them dead. So the fever can actually kind of do two things to help you out there. Now, there are also specific responses that the immune system cells can put forth. So the first thing that has to happen for a specific response to kick off is the detection of what we call those antigens. And antigens are the surface proteins on pathogens. We've talked about them before. Every single pathogen has a different antigen. So if we look on the outside of a virus, all those little all those little keys, all those little, spike proteins here, these are our antigens. When we talk about our cells, right? Remember we drew our cell membrane. Actually, that's a terrible cell membrane. Let's draw it a little bit better. All right, we'll draw a 3D version here. So there's our cell membrane, right? And remember we have like proteins, like channel proteins in our cell membrane with like tunnels in them that, let things through as needed. Keep drawing here. And some places we have peripheral proteins. And on those peripheral proteins, we find, if I can draw here, okay, this would be an example of a glycoprotein. And remember when we talked about the cell wall, we said that those antigens, those glycoproteins, are like cell signatures. They're like a name tag. So all the pathogens have different antigens or different name tags, just like we do. The second kind of immunity that you're going to end up with is the cellular immunity with T cells. So T cells are going to sweep in and they're going to kill infected body cells. Now that's important, right? So they're not only going to kill the pathogens, they'll also eat your own cells if they're infected, right? So the T cell has the right receptor to pick up an antigen. So this is a body cell, this blue cell right here. And when the pathogen goes into the cell, the antigens for the pathogen stay on the surface. And the T cell comes along and it says, hey, I recognize that this cell right here, this is an infected cell, and it kills it. All right, it's just like, man, we gotta take that guy out. The second thing going on is your B cells. All right, your B cells are memory cells. So the B cells are covered in these receptors. All right, and when a pathogen, interacts with them, they steal part of its antigens, and then they pass those antigens along to the T cells. That tells the T cell what to look for, and when you're like getting sick, the B cells get activated, and they start pumping out all of these antibodies. And when they pump out antibodies and they flood your system, they start to bind to those pathogens, like we said before, and they render them ineffective. So that's a pretty useful thing. That's called humoral immunity. So we have cellular immunity with the T cells, and we have humoral immunity with our B cells. Now, both responses produce more memory cells. And the memory cells are important because they're specialized T and B cells. They've like been through the battle. And this gives us what we call active immunity. They're covered in these antigens, right? We can see that antigen right there. There's another one. There's another one right there, that little blue Y looking thing. And that allows the body to rapidly recognize that pathogen were it to come back. So basically what that means is before the pathogens can get a foothold and make you sick, your immune system just goes, oh, hey, you don't belong here, and it eats them, it kills them. You don't have to worry about it. Now, there can be some issues with this, right? Sometimes you put something in your body that's not supposed to be there on purpose. So something like an organ transplant. If you have if you have the wrong antigens on the surface of those transplant cells, then you'll have what's called tissue rejection. So tissue rejection is when your immune system detects those proteins on that donor tissue and it makes antibodies against it, and your immune system starts to attack that healthy organ that you've tried to donate into the body. Basically, it causes the red blood cells to treat the transplant like it was a pathogen. Now, there are a lot of different ways we control pathogens. We can use antibiotics and we can use antiseptics. They both cause pathogens to burst, right? Antiseptics are used to kill the pathogens outside of the body. They do not target a specific pathogen. An antiseptic just sterilizes an area. Vinegar, soap are both good examples of this. So is hydrogen peroxide. Antibiotics kill pathogens inside the body. So these kill, one specific bacterium or fungus. They're tailor-made chemicals that attack a certain species of bacteria. They don't work against viruses, right? Kind of a dead giveaway here. Anti means the opposite of, bio means life, against living things, right? So they work against bacteria because they're alive. They're made of cells. They meet the 7 criteria. They work against a fungus because they're alive. They meet the 7 criteria of living things, but they're not effective against viruses. You can't take an antibiotic to get rid of a virus. All right. Now, there are some bad things about this, right? So just like there's some bad things when our immune system goes, overactive against a donor tissue, antibiotic use or overuse can lead to antibiotic resistant bacteria. So things like MRSA or VRE or super TB, TB stands for tuberculosis. These like bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics means that when you get sick and the doctor gives you the antibiotics, they don't kill them and you keep getting worse. So those are not good. Now, as far as how that resistance gets spread around, well, bacteria can do this conjugation. It's a way that they can swap pieces of their DNA with neighboring bacteria. And you can see it here, these little conjugate structures that are forming. Well, if you have a bunch of bacteria, let's say you have 1,000 bacteria and you treat it with an antibiotic and all but like 10 of them die. Well, the only 10 left are resistant to that antibiotic and they don't have as much competition. So those 10 start to, grow. The next time you treat them with antibiotics, instead of only 10 dying of the 1,000, maybe like all but 100 die. And so over time, the population of bacteria that keeps getting treated with the same antibiotic develops a resistance to it. So that's too much of a good thing, all right? Now, we can do artificial immunity, okay, through a vaccine. You can use vaccines to control pathogens, also just viral diseases. They're given to prevent illnesses, and they contain antigens of those weakened pathogens. Now, a lot of times you get this from a shot, and the smallpox vaccine, you can see that right there, is one of the most famous vaccines ever because smallpox was pretty much eradicated in human beings in, I think, the 1970s, all right? Now, it has made a little bit of a comeback, but luckily, I think there were 10 cases of smallpox in the States in the last probably like 20 years. But luckily, we've been able to treat those. Now, here's how a vaccine works. There are antigens in the vaccine that stimulate the specific immune response that we just talked about in your body. This is going to cause your memory B cells, okay, to get ready to go. The second thing that's going to go on is those stimulated memory B cells would bind to the real pathogen whenever you were exposed to it. The B cells can then activate to make antibodies, and that's going to fight the pathogens off before you get sick. Hopefully, all right, this is the key before you get sick. If your immune system is up to par, then it will fight off those bacteria or those viruses before you even know you have the disease. Now, some other things the immune system is associated with are allergies. An allergy is when you have an immune response to a harmless antigen. So it's not an antigen that belongs to like a bacteria that would make you sick. We usually call those antigens allergens. So to kind of distinguish it between the antigens of a bacteria that would be a part of a pathogen, and an allergen is an antigen that is harmless. That's the interesting thing about it is there's a reason you have that response, right? So you get this inflammation response, you get the production of eosinophils and white blood cells, and everything gets geared up to fight off an infection, and nothing shows up, right? Your allergies, like, because there are so many different allergens, that can be many different allergies. You can be allergic to specific foods like peanuts or milk. You can be allergic to pollen, the feces of dust mites in your house. You can be allergic to mold. You can have a chemical allergy. You can be allergic to metals, like certain metals can lead to like redness on the skin, bee stings. You can be allergic to a medicine, like if you're allergic to penicillin or amoxicillin. And unfortunately, allergens can cause what we call anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a extreme inflammation response. It causes your blood vessels and your airways to become too porous, and if not treated immediately, it can actually kill you. So that's an unfortunate side effect of our immune system. Here is the surface. In this picture right here, we have the surface of ragweed pollen. And you can see, like, there are the antigens, right? These little spikes sticking off. Cat dander is something that people, if you're allergic to cats, you're likely allergic to the dander. Those are the little skin cells on the surface of the hairs. And you can also be allergic to dust mites, which are tiny little animals that feed on dust. Dust is mostly like dead skin, so that's gross. If you have an autoimmune disease, then autoimmune self, right? Your immune system is attacking yourself, okay? And in an autoimmune disease, like it says, the white blood cells attack your cells. So this happens when the immune system can't recognize friend from foe. It's like it can't read the antigens. Your white blood cells think your regular somatic body cells are invaders, and they attack them. Well, if the white blood cells are doing their jobs attacking things, and that causes those tissues to break down, that can lead to things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is what's in this x-ray right here, which looks pretty rough. You can see this joint is very inflamed, right? It's very swollen because the white blood cells are attacking that joint, even though it belongs to the same person that the immune system belongs to. Now, there are a lot of autoimmune disease, like over 60, but here are a couple common ones. Multiple sclerosis is one that you may have heard of before, type 1 diabetes mellitus, and RA, which is rheumatoid arthritis. A lot of people get RA. Now, leukemia is another example of an issue with the immune system. So if you have abnormal white blood cells, that can lead to leukemia. This is caused by cancer of the bone marrow. It means you end up with a bunch of immature white blood cells in the body, and that gives you a weakened immune system. They're not mature, so they're not doing their job. This would be a comparison of some healthy white blood cells and some immature white blood cells. Now, the problem with leukemia is because your immune system is weakened, we get what we call opportunistic infections. So that's an infection that's like takes your weakened immune system as a good opportunity to colonize your gut, right, or colonize your nose. That can be a big issue, right? So the main issue here is that because your white blood cells are not mature, they can't fight off those infections. If they were mature, if you had a healthy immune system, you'd be fine, right? Another common, issue with the immune system that you may have heard of is HIV. So HIV is the human immunovirus, okay, or immunodeficiency virus, excuse me, and it's a retrovirus. It uses RNA instead of DNA. It attacks and weakens your immune system, and it's transmitted by, the intermixing of infected bodily fluids. And this is what the HIV virus looks like roughly. It's got all those little antigens on it, and it can attack the body, the white blood cells in your body. More copies of it get made and gets like spit out into the body. It just finds another white blood cell to kind of take over. Now, HIV leads to AIDS. So AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Okay, so this stands for acquired. I don't know. acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And basically what it means is you don't have enough white blood cells, your killer T cells. You don't have enough of them in order to fight anything off. So think about it kind of like a scale. All right. Let's say here's normal. All right, there's the normal number we need. If you get this low number here, if you are below this low number, we say that you are in the AIDS bracket. You have acquired a deficient immune system. Most people with HIV, like when they first get HIV, they're here, and then over time, their immune system deteriorates. Okay. Definitely not a good thing, right? You can't reproduce your T cells fast enough to keep up with the HIV virus. That's the issue there. And since you don't have enough T cells, they can't help in your immune responses. So all the things we looked at in those other slides about the immune response, the T cell can't do their job. Now, AIDS, like I said, is the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It leads to multiple opportunistic infections. You don't have a lot of T cells. And that can be a problem. So if you're graphing out the number of T cells, right, then per milliliters of blood, well, you can see that it's on the fault. The green line here would be the HIV virus load. Right, so as the virus goes up, the number of T cells goes down. All right, so that's it for the PowerPoint on the immune system. All right. If you have questions, let me know. I know that was a long video, but that's it for this week. So if you have questions, feel free to send me an email. Let me know what you need.